service station. This man was not intimidated by that cross burning. He stayed there.
By the 1960s, Anniston was moving closer to an event that would propel it into the national and even international spotlight. But several months before that, Art Bacon, a young student at Talladega College, met violent reaction to a simple act.
So I arrived on the train and went to the interstate passenger room. And I sat there. I noticed a guy talking on the telephone, a guy in a leather jacket, a white guy in a leather jacket, and he was making a telephone call. And I thought nothing of it. I had my green corduroy suit, gold tie, and yellow shirt on, and a tennis racket under one arm, and I was Joe College coming back to school. Nothing happened in the room except the guy continued to stare at me. When I left the waiting room, I went outside because I was waiting on a station wagon to arrive to pick up other passengers that would be coming later. I thought I would hitch a ride back to the campus. So I sat in the back of the car. Old man Lawler was driving the car. He must have been in his 70s. And shortly thereafter, 4 or 5 white men came out of the station and asked where the nigger that was sitting in the waiting room is, in the white waiting room is. And another hooligan on the outside said, he walked up and asked the driver, and the driver said, I don't know. And then somebody on the sideline said, there he is in the back. And then they hit Mr. Lawler, was the driver's name, in the mouth, and I saw teeth fly. And I got out of the car being, not wanting them to kill him. Well, of course, I didn't want to die either, but I stopped them from beating him by stepping out and saying, here I am. And then that's when the deluge of blows came, and they beat me until I fell to the ground. I could not. At first there was pain, but after a while I could only hear thuds of the blows as I went down, and I could see blood that was dripping out of my mouth into the clay. I could remember the clay, red clay of Alabama. And I don't know whether I blacked out or not, but I eventually heard somebody, felt somebody trying to pick me up. And blood was all over my face, and through the blood I could detect that there was a crowd of people standing around. Everybody out of the waiting room where the African Americans were standing around. Nobody, of course, tried to help me at all, except for this one guy that said it was a one-armed man, tried to help me off the ground. And eventually, after what seemed like an eternity to me, the ambulance came to take me to the hospital, and we stayed there for a few minutes rather. And one day, when the police got to me, I think Gordon Rogers came and picked me up, took me around to his clinic, and my teeth were dangling out of my mouth. He snipped my teeth off and then treated the exposed nerves with silver nitrate to kill the pain. No one was ever arrested. I went before I don't know, can't remember, I can't aptly say that it was a grand jury, but I went before a judge and a body of people, and they brought in some people for me to try to identify. Of course, I couldn't identify them because of the trauma and the fact that as soon as I stuck my head out of the car, they hit me right in the head, in the face, over my eye, and blood was flowing from that point on.
May 4th, 1961. Just 5 months after Art's brutal beating, 7 blacks and 6 whites boarded a bus in Washington, D.C. and headed south. Along the way, they planned to switch seats and use each other's facilities to see if America's interstate bus system was truly integrated. The old Greyhound bus left Atlanta, headed to Anniston. It was just before 1 o'clock in the afternoon when the bus reached Anniston. All was quiet, but only briefly. Suddenly, about 50 men appeared. One sat in front of the bus to keep it from leaving. Windows were broken, insults hurled, and in an act that would soon cement the vehicle's place in history, the driver's side front tire was slashed. The bus left the station with a police escort, but only to the city limits. Heading west on Highway 202, the bus made its way beyond the city with several cars and trucks in pursuit. By the time it reached the bottom of what was known as John Hardy Hill, the slashed tire gave way. The driver pulled off at Forsyth and Sons Grocery. The passengers were left to face the mob, but they had at least some help. Unknown to the circling mob, undercover highway patrol agent Eli Cowling had boarded the bus in Atlanta. He courageously kept the mob from entering the bus, and when windows were broken and a firebomb tossed inside, he drew his pistols, preventing the mob from trapping the riders inside, where they would have faced certain death. That night, all of the major television networks carried images of the burning bus, and those images made their way around the world. Local WDNG radio station owner Tom Potts Sr. broadcast live reports from the scene of the bus burning.
The bus burning was something, nobody saw it coming. Didn't know it was going to happen, but he heard about the disturbance, and he and Bobby Price got in the mobile unit, WDNG's mobile unit, and drove out 202. And my understanding is they were the only reporters on the scene as it was taking place. And they reported back to the station via two-way radio. The next day, he mentioned editorial, he had an auditorial that he did run that by today's standards would seem kind of like so, because basically what he said was that the way he looked at it was you had 2 groups of troublemakers looking for trouble, and they found each other, and that it was a sort of a bad thing from both sides. And I think over time we kind of tend to gloss one group over the other. When you look at it for what was happening at the time and where things were, there's some truth in what he had to say. But it didn't make any friends with anybody. Nobody liked hearing that from really any part of the community.
In spite of threats against him and his family, he made it clear in an editorial the next day that he was sticking by his original reporting. 1962. In an attempt to curb racial intolerance in the community, Anniston's dominant civil rights leaders, the Reverend N.Q. Reynolds of 17th Street Baptist Church and the Reverend Bob McLean of New Haven Methodist Church, sensed a wise and accepting heart in the pastor of Anniston's First Presbyterian Church, the Reverend Dr. Phillips Noble. They requested a meeting with him. Within days, Reverend Noble and the Reverend Alvin Bullen of Grace Episcopal Church joined these black spiritual leaders in forming the first integrated ministerial association. In cities across the South, violence continued its spread. In Anniston, it seemed to come in waves. May 1963, shotgun blasts were fired into St. John's Methodist Church and into 2 homes. That prompted city leaders to take a step that would raise a wall of resistance to the violence.
Then Millis Brow came up with the idea, or the idea had been floated, and he took it on as a campaign slogan, creating a biracial committee to create communication between the races and tamp down the possibility for a racial explosion.
It was a step that gained attention all the way to the White House. In a letter to Anniston Mayor Claude Deer, President John F. Kennedy called Anniston's Biracial Human Relations Council a model for the nation. The president wrote, "It seems to me this is a most significant action by the city government and one that offers great hope for permitting legitimate racial problems to be identified and considered in a calm and orderly manner. I hope that the council will provide the city of Anniston with a means of communication between the races and that its efforts will be fruitful. Your action is a sensible one and one that should serve as a model for the United States." Over 100 cities nationwide called on city officials to get information on the Anniston model. While President Kennedy was pleased with some of Anniston's leaders, he was less pleased with Alabama Governor George Wallace, who vowed to keep his fiery inaugural promise.
"In the name of the greatest people that have ever trod this earth, I draw the line in the dust and toss the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny, and I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever."
That promise led to his infamous schoolhouse door stand. He would attempt to block 2 black students from enrolling at the University of Alabama. It was a drama that played out on a national stage and gave Wallace what he sought, his moment in the spotlight. With federal intervention, the students were enrolled with no violence on the campus. However, many acts of violence waited in the future. September 15th, 1963. In Birmingham, as children prepared for annual Youth Day celebrations, a bomb exploded in the stairwell of 16th Street Baptist Church, killing 4 girls and injuring dozens of others. In the aftermath of the bombing, riots and violent demonstrations broke out throughout Birmingham. That same Sunday, Anniston's Carnegie Library was to be integrated in a quiet way, but it would not happen, not on that day. Word leaked out to the wrong people. 2 black ministers, N.Q. Reynolds and Bob McLean, parked their car about a half a block away. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. As they started walking toward the library, an angry mob of 50 to 100 suddenly appeared from different directions and severely beat the 2. They were lucky to survive the attack.
And no sooner than we got almost to the door, the whole crowd just emerged upon us. Unexpectedly, as I said, we had not anticipated that.
They were beaten with clubs and chains, and I'm the only one that remembers 2 shots being fired. Everybody else remembers 1, but there was at least 1. And Bob McLean says that he could hear it whistling over his head. It was that close.
So we ran head on unexpectedly to that mob that just crushed in upon us. It was sort of a holocaust to face something that really, had you anticipated it, maybe you would have been braced for it.
Of course, they turned and tried to get to their cars. They were only partly successful. Bob McLean was an athlete. He was a runner, and he did a lot better than Reynolds. And they just kept beating Reynolds and keep beating him. They finally got back together somewhere east of the library, and I don't know, I guess they were in McLean's car. They went to the hospital, Anniston Memorial Hospital, it was then known as, and they asked to be treated. And of course, you know what happened. If you don't, let me tell you, they were refused. A hospital refusing injured people, refusing to serve them, refusing to treat them. You know, that's bad.
The mob might have won a small battle that afternoon, but their actions made some even more determined that order would prevail. Once again, President Kennedy made contact with local leaders. In a telephone conference, he told the Human Relations Council that he had stationed additional federal troops at Fort McClellan, should they be needed. The next day, with no fanfare, Reverend Bob McLean returned to the library, accompanied by Reverend George Smitherman. They quietly entered the library and successfully received library cards. February 1964. After some months of relative calm, the calm was shattered.
Somebody threw a pipe bomb into his Miller Sproul's hardware store and did quite a bit of damage and could have hurt somebody. Thankfully, no one was hurt or injured, and they recovered. But the next day, that was when my dad went on with another auditorial condemning the act as an act of cowardice and that the community shouldn't be putting up with this kind of racial hatred, and the idea that they would do something like that to one of our leading citizens like Miller Sproul was just unbelievable abomination and shouldn't be condoned by anyone. And he'd find out who the people were that did it and call them to justice. And that's when he got the phone calls from, well, you know, I couldn't swear as to whose names it was, but they represented themselves as the high omnipotent stomper of the Ku Klux Klan or whatever. And told him that he would be getting on the air the next day and rephrasing what he had to say about his organization. And Dad said he wasn't going to be doing that, but that he would make available time for a responsible party to come up with an opposing viewpoint. And the guy said, "No, you've got to do that. I understand you've got a young family, and you don't want anything that happened to them." And Dad said, "Are you trying to threaten me?" And the guy said, "Well, no. Our organization is there to protect you and families like yours, and I just would hate to see you not protected. If you don't change your mind, that could be what happens." And Dad said, "Well, I'm not changing my mind about anything." And they did, within the next couple of days, the transmitter site was bombed. And the station was off the air for a number of hours. I don't think it was a whole day, but for a number of hours, maybe 8 or 10 hours. And no one was injured, and the property damage was, the guys evidently threw this bomb at this dynamite at the building, and it dropped into a little bit of a ditch area that was kind of adjacent to that, which absorbed most of the blast, evidently. But clearly that was a statement that was being made, and Dad said at the time, he could be walking down the street, and people he knew, he'd wave, and they just kind of turn their heads and walk across the street, go the other way. It was, too dangerous, I guess, to be thought of as being kind of too friendly. And from what I understand, people could pull their advertising, all kinds of other stuff out of fear. And instead of retreating or anything, he got on the air, not scolding anybody, but just talking about how the community needed to grow up and to embrace the realities that people are people, and that violence was not a way towards any kind of progress in the community.
Tom Potts is remembered for his courageous stand to publicly do the right thing and to foster communication and participation between the races. July 2nd, 1964. The Civil Rights Act, proposed by President Kennedy and signed into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson, outlawed major forms of discrimination against African Americans and women. It ended unequal voter registration requirements and racial segregation in schools. As a result of this legislation, some freedom of choice desegregation began in 1965. In 1967, Anniston became one of the 99 Alabama school systems involved in the statewide lawsuit Lee versus Macon County Board of Education.
You had a choice. You can go to either school that you wanted to go to. And if you lived in South Anniston, you can go to Anniston High. And then a few that was in West Anniston, they went to Anniston High. There was only a few in 67 and 68.
3 years later, in 1970, a plan to change the dual schools was ordered into effect.
We had the Anderson City Schools, and we had under the CAR was under ASTU, under black organization. And then the Anderson High School was under white, so we had to combine the two organizations also. And so it was a job for all of us to do, and we had to do reflective thinking, and we had to use common sense. I hate to say that, but we had to do that. And we had to have patience with each other and try to have human understanding and respect each other, as for white and black all together.
That same year, Calhoun County Training School was paired with Oxford High. Later, Cobb was converted to a junior high school, and Anniston became the only high school in the city. The result was full integration. While victories were being won and progress was being made, change seemed ever so slow to some. September 1964. The Calhoun County Improvement Association, a group of black citizens advocating freedom and fairness, had published a document titled the Anniston Manifesto. The document was in the form of a full-page ad in the Sunday edition of the Anniston Star. It referenced Anniston's designation as a model city and stated blacks wanted and deserved to be full citizens. The document cited the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bible. It contained quotes from Martin Luther King Jr. in making a plea for fairness. Even as black and white leaders continued efforts to maintain peace in Anniston, hard-fought struggles were still ahead, not just here, but all around. March 7th, 1965. 600 demonstrators made the first of 3 attempts to march from Selma to the Capitol in Montgomery to demand removal of voting restrictions on black Americans. The first attempt ended in violence, with attacks by law enforcement officers as they crossed Selma's Edmund Pettus Bridge. It became known as Bloody Sunday. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. eventually led over 3,000 marchers from Selma to Montgomery. He later told 25,000 demonstrators outside the Alabama state capitol that we are on the move now and no wave of racism can stop us. The dramatic scenes were captured on camera and broadcast across the nation. March 1965. Local dentist Dr. Gordon Rogers and Reverend N.Q. Reynolds filed a discrimination lawsuit against Anniston Memorial Hospital, seeking an end to racially segregated wards. July 15th, 1965. A white supremacist rally was held at the Calhoun County Courthouse in Anniston. About 100 Klan members and sympathizers listened to a parade of notorious speakers, including the charismatic Reverend Connie Lynch.
So strange to see these characters walking up 10th Street in unmilitary imprecision and then turning left onto Noble Street These peaked wizard hats looking so strange against the familiar Victorian buildings. And you had the feeling that you're watching a film of reality rather than, could this possibly be happening here and now? It was so alien.
He whipped the crowd into such a frenzy that a group of several white men left the event and randomly shot into a car carrying 3 black workers home from their jobs at an Anniston foundry.